Viminacium, Serbia, 630 CE, a burial pit at the edge of what was, not long before, the largest Roman fortress on the Danube frontier. Two skeletons in the same trench. One carries a genome that traces back to the Pontic steppe, the grasslands north of the Black Sea. The other's maternal line is Anatolian. They were buried within a generation of each other. And by this point, that was not unusual. That was normal. Here is what we thought we knew. The Slavic migrations of the 6th and 7th centuries CE were the single largest permanent demographic shift in European history. Not a raid, not a military campaign, replacement. A team led by Dr. Pablo Carrion at the Institute of Evolutionary Biology in Barcelona published in Cell in December 2023, after analyzing 146 ancient genomes from Serbia and Croatia. Their result was unambiguous. Slavic-speaking migrants contributed between 30 and 60% of the ancestry of all Balkan peoples alive today. Serbia, Croatia, Bulgaria, Greece, all of it. Every one of those populations carries a genomic signature that simply did not exist in the region before the 6th century. 30 to 60%. And yet, the data said the exact opposite for one small corner of the Western Balkans. In the highlands of what is now Albania, in the valleys between the Dinaric Alps and the Adriatic coast, there is a genetic profile that does not carry 30 to 60% Slavic ancestry. It carries almost none, and it doesn't trace to the medieval period, or the Roman period, or even the Iron Age. It traces, without interruption, to the Bronze Age, to populations living in that exact landscape more than 3,000 years before the Slavic migrations ever arrived. The Albanian language has no early Greek loanwords, none from the period when every surrounding language was absorbing Greek vocabulary. Linguists at the University of Vienna confirmed that Albanian diverged from Proto-Indo-European in a state of isolation deep enough that it developed features no neighboring language ever retained. A language doesn't do that inside an empire. It does that inside mountains and inside obscurity. We are not asking where the Albanians come from. We already have a large part of that answer. What we are asking is something harder. How does one Bronze Age population survive the event that erased every Bronze Age population around it? And what does that answer reveal? Not about them, but about the nature of survival itself. The ancient people who left this genetic signal had a name. Several names, actually, given to them by Greek and Roman historians who never agreed on which applied to whom. The DNA doesn't use any of those names, and what it calls these people is going to require you to reconsider almost everything you thought you knew about the ancient Balkans. If you've ever actually wondered where you come from, not the family story, but the real biological record, subscribe now, because this goes places the history books have not gone yet. Actually, before we go any further, I want to ask you something. When you trace your own family history, how far back does the trail go before it just disappears? Drop that in the comments, because by the time this video ends, that question is going to feel very different than it does right now. Chinamak, Albania, 2500 BCE, a burial. No inscription, no grave goods marking this person as royalty or warrior. The bones are ordinary, but the Y chromosome is not. It carries haplogroup R1bZ2103, a Yamnaya marker. It arrived in the Western Balkans from the Pontic-Caspian steppe, and it is still present in Albanian men today, 4,500 years later. Professor Ian Matheson at Harvard Medical School spent years building the foundational picture of Southeastern European prehistory. In 2018, his team published what became the essential map of the region's genetic history and nature, genome-wide data from 225 individuals who lived between 12,000 and 500 BCE. What his team identified was a decisive Bronze Age transformation in the Western Balkans. After 2500 BCE, a Yamnaya-related steppe population pushed south into the Dinaric corridor, the same migration that sent R1b west into France, and the British Isles sent a specific branch, Z2103, south, into the mountain interior of what would eventually become Albania. That branch didn't build a visible empire. It didn't leave behind the kinds of sites that archaeologists fight over. It went somewhere that no one would come looking for them again. But here's where it gets strange, because here is what that migration actually means for what follows. In 2026, a team led by Dr. Leonidas Romanos Davranoglu at Oxford University's Museum of Natural History published in Nature Human Behavior the most comprehensive reconstruction of Albanian origins ever attempted. Over 6,000 ancient Eurasian genomes and 74 newly sequenced present-day Albanians. What they confirmed is that the core Bronze Age ancestry in the Albanian highlands, this same Z2103 Yamnaya-derived lineage, was not diluted out by the Roman-era influx of Anatolian ancestry that reshaped the rest of the Balkans. It was not diluted out by the Slavic flood. In the Albanian mountain interior, neither wave reached full saturation. The Bronze Age substrate held. Here is the part that matters. The label Illyrian was coined by ancient Greek geographers to describe the Adriatic coastal people they traded with and occasionally fought. The population living further inland, in the mountains, was largely invisible to that written record. The Greek historians documented Illyrian pirates on the coastline. They did not document Albanian mountain farmers in the interior. The people who survived the next 3,000 years did so precisely because they were not considered important enough to document. That is not a footnote. That is the beginning of the actual story. And this is why the central debate in Albanian scholarship, the question of Illyrian descent, has been asking the right question in completely the wrong direction. The 2026 study found something that flips the entire frame. The question was never whether Albanians descended from Illyrians. The real question, the one that nobody thought to ask, is whether the historical Illyrians we know from ancient records were themselves descended from the population that would eventually become the Albanians. Dalmatia, 230 BCE. Queen Tota of the Ardean Illyrians has just ordered her fleet to attack Roman merchant vessels in the Adriatic. Rome sends ambassadors. She has them killed. This triggers the First Illyrian-Roman War, and in the generations of Roman historians who write about it, the word Illyrian is applied to peoples living across modern Albania, Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, and North Macedonia. Groups who spoke different languages, built different material cultures, and according to the DNA, carried meaningfully different genetic profiles. Illyrian was not an ethnic category. It was a Roman administrative convenience, a label imposed from the outside, applied to a coastline. The 2026 Davranoglu study confirmed this at the genomic level. The haplogroup EV13, which has deep Balkan roots, concentrated in the Dardanian zone covering modern Kosovo, southern Serbia's and western North Macedonia, was a significant component of the population Rome called Illyrian in some areas, but it was absent or rare in the western coastal Illyrian populations. Two groups, one Roman label. Genetically, not the same people. Everything I just told you? Hold on to it, because it's about to mean something completely different. Because when the same study looked at Albanian paternal ancestry, specifically the Y chromosome lineages carried by Albanian men today, it found direct continuity from Bronze Age Balkan populations, including those the archaeologists identify as Illyrian. The DNA resolves the debate not by picking a side, it collapses the terms entirely. The people are real. The continuity is real. The ancient label was invented by someone who was looking from the wrong direction, and the living evidence is stranger than the ancient. Albanian men today carry haplogroup J2BL283, a lineage found in Iron Age Dalmatian sites, in Bronze Age Vojvodina, in Roman-era Moesia and Dardania. The genealogical separation dates for these lineages in present-day Albanian males run to 3,100 to 3,600 years ago. Not statistical projections. These are living men whose paternal lines trace to the Bronze Age and have not been replaced by any subsequent migration. Every wave that reshaped the Balkans around them, and there were several, passed through, and their paternal line did not move. Here is the implication that the debate never wanted to sit with. The Illyrian label, and the Roman documentation that came with it, attached itself primarily to the coastal populations, the visible ones, the disruptive ones, the ones who raided trade ships. The highland interior population, the one who actually carried the older, more continuous Bronze Age ancestry, received the label incompletely, imprecisely, and often not at all. They survived not because of their Illyrian identity. They survived because that identity was never fully theirs to begin with. And here is what should stop you cold. The genomic study found Albanian individuals buried in southern Albania whose genetic profiles already match modern Albanians. not in the Iron Age, not in the Roman period. By 800 to 900 CE, centuries before Albanians appear in a single written source. These people were Albanian in every genomic sense of the word before the word existed. November 1079 CE. A Byzantine chronicle, the Alexiad of Anna Komnene, mentions almost in passing a military unit moving through the highlands near modern Albania. She calls them Arbanatai. It is the first surviving written reference to Albanians in any document in any language. The population behind those mountains had existed, genetically, since the Bronze Age. They had been speaking a distinct Indo-European language for at least 3,000 years. They had survived the Slavic migrations, the Roman occupation, the Hellenistic period, the entire arc of ancient and late antique history, and they had not appeared in a single surviving text for 3 centuries before Anna Komnene needed to move troops through their territory. 3 centuries. Silence. Genetic research referenced in the 2026 Davranoglu study points to a bottleneck, a compression event, occurring roughly around 500 CE, right at the moment of maximum Slavic pressure on the Balkans. A bottleneck in population genetics is precise. It means a large population contracts to a small founding group, and the surviving lineages carry reduced genetic diversity as a direct result. This is not inference. It is a measurement you can take from a genome today and read like a scar. The signal is in every Albanian alive. It says, at some point in the early medieval period, your entire people passed through a very narrow door. This isn't just ancient history. This is in your DNA right now, if you carry any Balkan ancestry at all. Think about what that compression means in human terms. A population large enough to hold a language, a set of customs, a memory of who they are, reduced within living generations to a remnant small enough that one winter, one epidemic, one bad harvest could have ended the entire lineage. Every Albanian alive today descends from the people who made it through that door. Dr. Davranoglu and his colleague confirmed that by 800 to 900 CE, the Albanian genetic profile was already established and stable. The bottleneck had already closed. What we see in the 9th century is not a people forming. It is a people who have already survived something we don't have a precise word for yet. And here is a detail that has no parallel in any surrounding language. Albanian retains a vigesimal counting system, base 20, counting in 20s rather than 10s. In Europe, this feature survives only in Basque and in archaic Celtic. It was not in Latin, it was not in Greek, it was not in Slavic. It is a structural fossil from a period of isolation so complete, so long, and so uninterrupted that the arithmetic of the Bronze Age was still in use when Albanians entered the historical record in the 11th century. Hold on, I want to pause here, because something just connected for me and I think it might for you too. Last time, we looked at the Battle of Agincourt and how the pharmacological evidence buried in those wounds told a story the chronicles never recorded. The gap between what history writes down and what human bodies actually remember. That's exactly what we're looking at right now. A people whose bones carry a 3,000-year story that the written record simply ignored for 3 centuries. What does history leave out about the people nearest to you? Drop it in the comments. And stay with me, because the next piece of evidence is about to make that silence feel very specific. What the Davranoglu team found next came from the most unexpected direction. The people who preserve the most complete version of the old Albanian genome are not living in Albania. Spezzano Albanese, Calabria, Italy, population approximately 6,500 Easter Sunday. The liturgy in the local church is not conducted in Italian. It has not been conducted in Italian for over 600 years. The language spoken here is Arboresh, a form of Albanian that diverged from mainland varieties in the 15th century, when communities fled the Ottoman advance and settled in villages across southern Italy and Sicily. And the men in this community carry Y chromosome profiles that overlap, according to population genomics, with medieval Albanian samples at rates that, in some cases, exceed what you find in modern Tirana. A Bronze Age genetic signal from a mountain population nobody documented, surviving in a Baroque church in Calabria, in a language Rome never heard and the Slavs never touched. This discovery was confirmed through identity by descent analysis, a method that identifies shared DNA segments between ancient and living individuals and can trace genealogical connections across centuries. The Davranoglu 2026 team used an enhanced IBD protocol as one of their core analytical tools. What it showed was this. Present-day Albanians have deep genealogical connections to medieval and early medieval individuals from Albania itself. Connections tighter than those found between medieval populations and their modern descendants in many surrounding Balkan regions. The Arboresh communities, isolated in southern Italian villages for 6 centuries, preserved an older version of that profile. Here is what that actually means. We think of the homeland as the archive. The diaspora carries a copy. But what the genetics shows is the reverse. While mainland Albania was exposed to some additional gene flow during the Ottoman and post-Ottoman periods, the diaspora communities, cut off, isolated, demographically closed, preserved a less diluted version of the pre-Ottoman Paleo-Balkan genome. In the Arboreshi, you can read the Bronze Age more clearly than you can in the place the Bronze Age people actually lived. In the Arboresh village of Piana degli Albanesi in Sicily, the Orthodox Christian liturgy has been conducted without interruption since 1488. The language of that liturgy preserves grammatical features that mainland Albanian has since shed. These villages are not curiosities, they are control groups. When a population is expelled, compressed, and isolated, what it carries forward is specific. It carries what was already there, unchanged, unmixed, undiluted by whatever came next. And yet the deeper surprise isn't the Arboresh themselves. It's what they force us to ask about the Balkans they left behind. For 2 centuries, historians debated whether Albanians descended from Illyrians or from Thracians, from the peoples of the Western Balkans or the peoples of the Eastern. These were treated as rival hypotheses. The 2026 study found something neither side anticipated. In the Bronze Age Western Balkans, the genetic distinction between what Greek historians called Illyrian and what they called Thracian, at least in the border zones of Dardania, was frequently not a distinction at all. The 6th century CE, the Slavic migration wave that rewrote every Balkan genome moved overwhelmingly through the river corridors, the Sava, the Morava, the Vardar, the natural highways of southeastern Europe. The Albanian highlands don't contain those corridors. They contain ravines, karst topography, mountain valleys at elevations that Slavic agricultural communities had no incentive to occupy, no supply lines to reach, no political reason to prioritize. The terrain protected the people in it. The geography explains the survival. The story is tidy. What they found next changed everything they thought they knew about this. Dr. Carrion's Cell 2023 team mapped the Slavic genetic contribution across the Balkans with extraordinary precision. The numbers declined southward, 50 to 60% in present-day Serbia, 30 to 40% in mainland Greece, 20% in the Aegean Islands, and in the Albanian highlands, not zero, reduced, limited, but not zero. The Davranoglu 2026 study was explicit. Medieval Albanians showed limited rather than absent Slavic admixture. The mountains slowed the wave. They did not stop it. Some Slavic ancestry entered the highlands. The Bronze Age signal survived anyway, which means the mountains as refuge explanation is correct and incomplete, both at once. And the part that's incomplete is the part that matters. Gjurg Kastriati, Skanderbeg, the 15th century Albanian lord who led resistance against the Ottoman advance, is today the national symbol of Albanian identity. His family came from the northern Albanian highlands. His personal name, Gjurg, is the Albanian form of George. His father's name, John, Albanian for John. Byzantine Christian names, adopted through cultural contact with the empire. The culture absorbed the contact. The genome resisted it. That gap between what culture absorbs and what a genome holds on to is what makes the Albanian case unlike anything else in the European record. The IBD analysis in the 2026 study showed that medieval individuals from southern Albania, 8th and 9th century, share deep genealogical connections with populations from the Dardanian interior, Kosovo, southern Serbia. The Slavic wave didn't miss the highlands, it entered them, and the Bronze Age signal survived anyway, which means the highlands weren't a wall. They were a slow filter. Material passed through, but the substrate held. And then, in the last 20 seconds of what seemed like a complete explanation, the filter theory acquires a crack it cannot close. Because if some Slavic ancestry entered the Albanian highlands, and the data confirms it did, Why didn't the Slavic language come with it? Every other Balkan population that received 30 to 60% Slavic ancestry now speaks a Slavic language, or a language so reshaped by Slavic contact that its pre-Slavic form is nearly unrecoverable. Albania received Slavic genes. It did not become Slavic, the language did not move. And nobody, not one published paper, not one linguistic model, has a complete answer for why. The fault line between Slavic majority and Albanian majority populations in the Western Balkans, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Montenegro, is not a modern accident. It is the precise geographic edge of the Slavic migration's southern reach in the 7th century. That boundary did not begin in 1998. It began in 650 CE, and the genomic map of that boundary has not meaningfully changed in 400 years. By 700 CE, the linguistic map of the Balkans looked like this. Latin derivatives, the ancestors of Romanian, surviving in the northern mountains, Greek in the south, Slavic flooding everything between them, Thracian gone, Dacian gone, the coastal Illyrian dialects gone, Mesapic across the Adriatic in southern Italy gone, every Paleo-Balkan language that had survived the Roman period dead, every single one, except one. In the Western Highlands, in the valleys, the Slavic agricultural settlers had no reason to enter. A language continued to be spoken that had been developing in isolation since at least 1,000 years before the Common Era, possibly earlier. There are 3 things the 2026 study revealed about why that language survived. The third one is the one that changes everything. First, Dr. Davranoglu's team confirmed genomic continuity. Present-day Albanians descend predominantly from West Balkan Late Bronze and Iron Age populations, the same people speaking the earliest forms of that language. The biological thread held. Second, that descent was transmitted through a small, cohesive founding population, the bottleneck signal, whose compression and subsequent geographic isolation prevented the large-scale admixture events that carried Slavic language into surrounding regions. Language does not survive population replacement. The genome is the reason Albanian was never replaced. Third, here is the one that changes everything. Albanian had, compared to its competitors, a smaller speaker population, less political backing, less prestige, less territory, less documentation. At the moment the Slavic migrations arrived, Albanian had none of the things that languages are supposed to need in order to survive. What it had was mountains and irrelevance. The Davranoglu study found that Albanian genetic profiles were established by 800 to 900 CE in a small, cohesive ancestral population. Not conquerors, not empire builders. A population that was never important enough for its language to be systematically suppressed. Never visible enough to be systematically displaced. Never occupying valleys worth systematically colonizing. Albanian survived because Albanian was overlooked. Every other language in the Balkans was noticed. Albanian was not. And here is the oldest surviving sentence ever written in the Albanian language. It comes from 1462 CE. A Catholic bishop needed to confirm that a baptism had been conducted correctly. He wrote down the formula, not a poem, not a law, not a chronicle of kings, a bureaucratic footnote, a sacramental administrative record. The first written Albanian sentence in all of recorded history exists because a bishop needed to verify a ritual was valid. 3,000 years of human language. And its first document is a footnote in a church register. The Albanians were not protected by their geography. Not entirely, not completely. The Slavic migrations reached the highlands. The data confirms this, and left a genetic trace. The mountains slowed the wave. They did not stop it. What stopped it? What actually preserved the Bronze Age substrate, the language, the paternal lineages, tracing to 3,500 years ago, was something no military strategy could have engineered and no empire would have thought to provide. The Albanian highlands held nothing worth taking. The Slavic agricultural communities had no incentive to fully colonize terrain that produced nothing they needed. The Roman cultural machine documented Illyrian pirates because the pirates disrupted trade. The mountain interior disrupted nothing. It was too small, too poor, too far from any road that mattered to be worth the effort of erasure. The sole surviving Paleo-Balkan people did not survive through greatness. They survived through irrelevance and the indifference of history, the specific, accidental mercy of being forgotten by everyone who might have destroyed them. is the thing that kept 3,000 years of human continuity alive. The bottleneck was real, the compression was real, and the genomic data includes something that will stay with you. Signals consistent with a population that came, at some point between 500 and 800 CE, within reach of extinction. If that small, cohesive founding remnant in the Albanian highlands had been extinguished by one bad winter, one epidemic moving through a valley, one generation that simply didn't make it, there would today be no Albanian language, no living genomic trace of the Bronze Age West Balkan world. One valley, one winter, one generation that held on, and everything that followed is because they did. In population genetics, a bottleneck leaves a signature. When a large population compresses to a small founding group, the surviving lineages carry reduced genetic diversity. Specific haplogroups become overrepresented, others disappear entirely. The Albanian genome carries this signature clearly. When researchers look at the distribution of Albanian Y chromosome lineages, they find a pattern consistent with a small number of founding patrilinees, a handful of male lines from which the modern population descends. Some lineages that should be present, based on what pre-bottleneck Balkan populations carried, are simply absent. Stay with me, because this next part is the reason this video exists. Those absent lineages are not a data gap. They are a record. They are the genomic trace of the people who did not make it through. The men whose lines ended. The families that were extinguished inside that compression event, somewhere in the Albanian highlands, sometime between 500 and 800 CE. You cannot name them, no chronicle recorded them, but their absence is measurable. You can read it in the genomes of living people today as clearly as you can read a date on a document. The bottleneck didn't just shape the Albanians who survived, it deleted the ones who didn't. Dr. Davranoglu's 2026 study confirmed that Albanians descend from what the authors describe as a small and cohesive ancestral population, meaning the compression was severe enough to leave a statistical mark in every genome in the modern Albanian population. This is not a historical inference. It is a present-day measurement. Every living Albanian carries a genome that was shaped by a contraction close enough to extinction that modern sequencing equipment can read the scar. The IBD analysis showed genealogical connections between medieval Albanian individuals and present-day Albanians that are, in some cases, tighter than the connections between medieval populations and their modern descendants in surrounding Balkan regions. Think about what that means. The founding group was small. It reproduced within a closed network, and the tightness of those genealogical connections, visible in the data, is not just evidence of continuity. It is evidence of how narrow the corridor of survival actually was. The Albanian clan system, the FIS, preserves patrilineal descent structures whose haplogroup separation dates, according to genealogical databases tracking Albanian Y DNA, run back 3100 to 3600 years. The clan system is not simply a social custom. It is the architecture of a population that came through a bottleneck and held onto the memory of its founding lines as a survival strategy. The FIS is the bottleneck preserved in social form. The Bronze Age compressed into a set of rules about who you are and where you come from, and which valley your father's father's father came from. And there is one piece of evidence that would settle the deepest remaining question, the one the genetics keep circling without being able to close. No ancient DNA has yet been recovered from an individual who can be confirmed as a speaker of Proto-Albanian. The genetic continuity is established. The people are real. The language survived. But the specific moment when that language was born, in which valley, among which group, in response to which migration, that remains open. The genome tells us who lived in the Albanian highlands. It does not tell us what word they used for mountain. Not yet. Somewhere in the Albanian highlands, between 800 BCE and 500 CE, a language that had been developing in isolation since the Bronze Age was being spoken by people who will never appear in any surviving document. We know their genes. We have sequenced ancient individuals from their landscape. We know their Y chromosomes traced to a Yamnaya migration from the Pontic steppe 4,500 years ago. We know their population compressed and survived and became the ancestors of every Albanian alive today. We know their genetic profile was established by 800 CE, centuries before anyone wrote their name down. We do not know and may never know what they called themselves. The 2026 Nature Human Behavior study by Dr. Leonidas Romanos Davernoglu and his colleagues is the most complete genomic reconstruction of Albanian origins ever published. It analyzed over 6,000 ancient West Eurasian genomes. It sequenced 74 newly sampled present-day Albanians, covering all major dialect groups. It resolved the question of genetic origins, where the Albanians come from, when their founding population stabilized, how the Bronze Age ancestry survived the Slavic flood. It resolved all of that. What it could not resolve is the question of linguistic origins, because ancient DNA does not carry language. The genome tells you who was there. It does not tell you what they said to each other. And yet, the data said the exact opposite of what we expected about what kind of survival this was. We expected, if we thought about it at all, that the story of the Albanians would be a story of resistance, of a people who held their ground, who fought back, who were simply too strong to be erased. What the DNA shows is something quieter, and if you sit with it, something much harder to hold. The compression was real. The near extinction was real. The survival was not the result of exceptional force or exceptional visibility. It was the result of the specific combination of terrain, obscurity, and the accumulated indifference of every power that might have otherwise noticed them. Before I give you the last line, I want you to consider something. If you carry any Bronze Age West Balkan ancestry, through Greek, Serbian, Croatian, Bulgarian, Romanian, or Italian lineage, the genomic evidence suggests you carry some trace of the Paleo-Balkan world. The Albanian survival is the extreme version, the concentrated version, but the distribution of Bronze Age Balkan ancestry across southern Europe is not exclusive to Albanians. What they preserved at high concentration, others carry in smaller proportions. The last surviving language of that world is Albanian, but the last surviving gene from that world, that may be yours. It may be in you right now, in a ratio too small to name, from a people too obscure to have left a chronicle. The next episode in this series looks at a different kind of survival, not of a people, but of a single genetic variant found across 4 continents, tracing back to one specific event in human prehistory. If what happened in those Albanian highlands kept you here, subscribe, because the next story is smaller, and it is much more personal. Albanian was the only Paleo-Balkan language that survived, not because it was the strongest, not because it was the most widely spoken, not because any force on earth chose to protect it. It survived because the valley it was spoken in was too small, too poor, and too far from any road that mattered. 3,000 years of human language, preserved by the specific mercy of being forgotten.